October 1944. Torrential rain had turned the positions of the 28th Infantry Division into knee-deep mud. Initially, missing soldiers were believed to have suffocated in the mud. It wasn't until someone witnessed firsthand the mud at the bottom of the trenches tearing like skin, dozens of backward bent jointed arms dragging fully armed soldiers alive underground without leaving a single bubble, that the nature of this war fundamentally changed. 3 in the morning, pouring rain. Sentinel Miller stood at the corner of the trench, his combat boots sinking into knee-deep mud. Rainwater streamed down the edge of his helmet, forcing him to wipe his eyes with his sleeve every few seconds. The surface of the mud shifted. The mud itself was bulging upward, as if something beneath was turning over. Miller looked down and saw 5 muddy columns rising from the surface of his left boot. Each column had knuckles, fingernails, and joint lines digging into the leather. 3 complete hands emerged from the mud, their fingernails clogged with black grime, knuckles pale, gripping his calf. The skin on their palms was the waxy white of drowned corpses, with faint yellow tissue fluid seeping from the creases. Miller drew his bayonet and stabbed fiercely at the back of the nearest hand. The blade pierced the palm. The palm split open horizontally along the wound, turning into a mouth, lips curling outward, lined with 2 rows of tiny teeth on the inside. The crowns of the teeth resembled human molars, and their biting force made the blade emit a metallic screech. Miller screamed. More arms stretched out from the mud. The entire surface of the trench tore like skin simultaneously. From the cracks, countless backward bent, bluish-gray arms surged forth. 1 pair. 3 pairs. More than 10. Fingers clawed into his combat uniform, tactical straps, and the edge of his helmet. Miller's body began to sink downward. He was dragged alive into the mud. As the mud submerged his chest, his ribs made cracking sounds. When it reached his shoulders, his collarbone protruded from his collar. He raised his M1 rifle and slammed the butt against the mud. The butt sank into the mud, was gripped, and pulled downward. Miller made one final upward push. His helmet disappeared first, then his chin, then his mouth, then both hands. The surface of the mud returned to calm. No bubbles. No blood. No signs of struggle. Only the M1 rifle remained, standing upright in the mud, its butt slowly sinking. 3 seconds later, the butt disappeared completely into the mud. At the other end of the trench, the medic was startled awake by the screams. He grabbed his medical kit and rushed through the communication trench. As his flashlight beams swept Miller's sentry post, the last bit of the rifle's barrel vanished beneath the mud. The flashlight beam swayed over the empty mud surface. Raindrops struck the flashlight's glass cover with a sound like hailstones. The entire trench was as quiet as a morgue. Combat log, October 7, 1944. My 11th month serving with the 28th Infantry Division. Over the past 3 days, the heavy rain had turned the trenches into drainage ditches. The mud depth rose from ankle-deep to knee-deep. The engineering platoon couldn't transport the water pumps, and the company ordered all excavation work to cease. The bomb disposal team found German S-mines and 2 unexploded mortar shells in the mud last week. 3 soldiers had already gone missing. The company records listed them as suspected German night raid captures and suffocated in mud. The sentry posts of the 3 missing soldiers were all in the same section of the trench, all on night shifts. All had mentioned stepping on something hard beneath their feet. Like flesh. Sergeant Crawford ordered empty ammunition crates to be dismantled and laid as stepping platforms. No one was allowed to stand directly in the mud. Bubbles occasionally rose from the surface of the mud. The air was thick with the rusty, bloody stench of a slaughterhouse's draining trough. The soldiers said it was the smell of German buried corpses rotting. Radio intercepts captured audio from the German side. For 3 consecutive nights, there were no artillery coordinates, no tactical communications, only a single Latin word repeating. The intelligence officer said it might be some kind of religious broadcast. At 6 in the morning, the company commander sent my squad to investigate Miller's missing position. Mission directive: confirm whether German infiltration tunnels existed. I set out with 7 men. Miller's sentry post was at the westernmost corner of the trench, and it took us about 4 minutes to walk along the communication trench. Henderson led the way, while I brought up the rear, documenting the situation. Each of us was tied together at the waist with a rope to prevent separation if anyone sank into the mud. When we arrived, the rifle was still there. The boat was wrapped in a translucent membrane. The membrane's surface was crisscrossed with blood vessel-like ducts, and fluid flowed inside them. The edges of the membrane fused seamlessly with the mud, with no clear boundary. Henderson prodded the mud surface with his submachine gun barrel. The mud wrinkled like skin. The wrinkles spread outward, the surface of the mud collapsed from the center, and eyeballs floated up. Dozens of human eyeballs. Pupils of different colors, irises with distinct patterns, glistening with the moisture of corneas. A thin layer of mud coated the surface of the eyeballs, and they all turned their pupils simultaneously, focusing on the 8 of us. Every eye blinked once. Upper and lower eyelids emerged from the mud, closed, and retracted. The eyes sank back into the mud, leaving fingerprint-like ripples on its surface. Crawford ordered a retreat. We retraced our steps, only to find that the phosphorescent markers pinned to the trench walls had all been flipped, their backs facing the passage. I checked the rope at my waist. The knot at the end of the line, where Wilson was, had been untied. The rope's end was mushy, the fibers corroded by digestive fluid. Wilson was missing. Dark red liquid began to seep from the mud walls on both sides of the trench. It flowed down the earth's grooves, branching and branching again, forming a network of vein-like patterns that spanned the entire trench. When the flashlight beam swept over it, the liquid surface glinted with a pulsating sheen. The entire squad went into combat readiness. 8 men, back to back, gun barrels pointing in 8 directions, began to withdraw along our original path. 4 M1 rifles, 2 Thompson submachine guns, 1 bar automatic rifle, and 1 M1 carbine, all aimed at the mud walls. The mud rose from knee-deep to thigh-high within 10 minutes. The entire surface lifted as if a force was pushing the floor from below. The mud began to tremble rhythmically. The first tremor was about 3 seconds apart, the second 2.5 seconds, the third 2 seconds. The frequency increased, the pulsation growing stronger, like a heartbeat. With each tremor, the mud's viscosity increased. The effort required to pull our boots out doubled each time. Private Kowalski was on the left side of the formation when he missed a step. His body sank instantly to his chest. As the mud covered the ammunition pouches on his tactical vest, Henderson on the right and Myers on the left simultaneously grabbed his arms and pulled. A dull sound of bones breaking came from about half a meter below the mud, followed by the sharp scraping of bone fragments. Kowalski's bones hadn't broken. Something in the mud was fracturing. Kowalski screamed. He said something was touching his leg. Fingers, many fingers, from his knee up to his inner thigh. Henderson and Myers pulled with all their strength. Kowalski's body was yanked out of the mud. Above his belt buckle, his torso was intact. Below the buckle, his tibia, fibula, and femur, all 3 pairs of bones, were fully exposed, coated in a translucent layer of fascia. The muscle tissue, skin, and fat layers had been stripped away, leaving black particles of congealed mud at the tendon attachment points. The periosteum still glinted under the flashlight, and 6 long, mud-formed tentacles clung to the bones, their tips slowly writhing and retracting from the bone crevices. Kowalski looked down at his lower body. His Adam's apple bobbed once. His mouth opened. The mud closed around his chest, pulling him back in. At least 20 human arms emerged from the mud's surface. Each arm was about 70 to 90 centimeters long, measured from the mud's surface. The joints were bent, elbows outward, wrists capable of a full 360-degree rotation. The fingers were twice the length of a normal adult's, with prominent knuckles and nails embedded in the flesh pads. The skin had the glossy, fat-saturated hue of flesh soaked for weeks, the epidermis and dermis filled with tissue fluid, giving it a translucent, blistered appearance. Henderson opened fire. The Thompson submachine gun's 20-round magazine sprayed 45 caliber bullets into the mud. The bullets hit the mud with the dull thud of raw meat, and black liquid, viscous like a mix of blood and oil, spurted from the impact points. The area of the mud hit by concentrated gunfire temporarily lost its viscosity, the tentacles breaking into several segments, black blood oozing from the severed ends, the broken limbs twitching on the mud's surface. "Fire at the mud under your feet," I said. 4 rifles simultaneously fired at the mud beneath our feet. The bullets shattered the surface tension of the mud, temporarily turning it into a slurry, and the tentacles retreated from around our boots. We fired and withdrew, moving along the communication trench toward the main position. We had less than 40 meters to go. Faces began to emerge from the mud. The first face appeared about 40 centimeters up from the ground on the left mud wall. It was Private Hawkins, one of the first to go missing 3 days ago. His face was a waxy yellow, his eye sockets filled with mud. His lips moved. "Go down," Hawkins' face said. "It's warm down there." The second face surfaced in the center of the mud. It was Sergeant Salazar. His mouth opened and closed, the sound echoing from deep within the mud, distorted by the liquid. "Mom," Salazar's face said. "Mom, I told them I'm in France." The third, fourth, and fifth faces emerged simultaneously. All soldiers who had gone missing in this stretch of trench over the past 72 hours. Their facial features were intact, their skin color the same as in life, their lips moving in unison, each speaking different sentences, but their voices overlapping to form a single, chilling message. "Come down. It's warm. Come down." Private Freeman halted, his rifle muzzle lifting from the mud as he stared at the face of his tent mate emerging from it. "Eddie?" Freeman called out. An arm shot out of the mud, fingers gripping Freeman's ankle. He was dragged down, the back of his head slamming against the edge of an ammo box, his helmet flying off. In the next second, he was pulled into the mud without even a bubble to mark his passing. Crawford tossed a smoke grenade toward where Freeman had vanished. Yellow smoke filled the trench, the tentacles' accuracy momentarily diminished as they relied on the vibrations through the mud for targeting. 7 of us dashed back to the main position. Crawford took a head count. Kowalski dead. Freeman dead. Wilson dead. 2 wounded. Technician Sanchez with a deep bite on his right calf, the wound exposing bone with a clear indentation of teeth marks on the surface of the tibia, and Corporal Gray with a long, 11-centimeter tear on the outer side of his left thigh, the muscle fibers exposed and raw. As I cleaned the wounds, I noticed a layer of transparent film adhering to the inner walls. The film was about 0.5 millimeter thick and resisted the surgical forceps with a resilient tension, its edges sharply defined against the normal muscle tissue. When touched, the film contracted, its surface wrinkles pulling inward. I sealed the sample in a vial of alcohol and stored it in the first pocket of the medical kit. The transparent film was slowly burrowing along the muscle fibers. The platoon leader received a radio call. His index finger trembled as he pressed the earpiece, the knuckles gray with dried mud. He called for immediate support from battalion, repeating his fire request 3 times. Static crackled on the other end, interspersed with German prayers, not tactical commands, but trembling, choked pleas as if something was blocking the throat. Between the prayers, a single English sentence, identical in tone and rhythm to the missing Wilson, repeated 3 times. We grabbed salt blocks from the ammo boxes and began laying down a defensive line. After the entire squad retreated to the main position, the platoon leader ordered a salt barrier. The salt blocks from our rations were unpacked and spread along the bottom of the trench, forming a 5-centimeter thick barrier. The intelligence officer relayed a snippet from a local church record from the 9th century, which mentioned using salt to seal away unclean things. The original text was in Latin, and Patrick translated the key passages. Once the salt barrier was complete, the mud stopped pulsating. The tentacles retreated below the surface, and the trench fell silent. 6 hours passed without any signs of movement. The radio crackled back to life. Battalion confirmed that the engineer platoon with M2 flamethrowers was en route, expected to arrive at dawn the next day. I used the respite to check on the wounded. The transparent film in Sanchez's right calf wound had stopped spreading and had retracted about 3 millimeters from the edge. I clamped the edge of the film with the forceps, and it contracted, the wrinkles pulling inward. The sample was sealed in a second vial of alcohol, placed alongside the first in the medical kit. The film in Gray's thigh wound had also stopped spreading, but thin, dark blue lines had appeared in the subcutaneous layer of skin around the wound, following the lymphatic vessels, about 4 centimeters long. I traced the lines with a marker and noted the time. Henderson sat on an ammo box, disassembling and reassembling the Thompson submachine gun's mechanism. He said the Latin word in the German prayers was ligare carnem, to bind flesh. Patrick pulled out a Latin prayer manual from his backpack and cross-referenced it with the witch-hunting literature to find the antonym. The Latin pronunciation was so similar that a single wrong syllable could turn the seal into a summoning. Patrick scribbled a line of Latin on a blank page of the prayer manual, crossed it out, and wrote another, then crossed that one out as well. Beneath the salt layer, the mud began to stratify. The upper layer, in contact with the salt, dehydrated and carbonized, forming a hardened crust. The lower layer, saturated with the dead, had developed a network of fibrous strands as strong as steel wire, which the salt blocks could not dissolve. As night fell, all the empty ammo boxes at the bottom of the trench were rechecked and reinforced. The sentries were doubled. No one noticed the mud surface as we laid down the salt blocks. All 12 of us stood on the ammo boxes, our eyes level or upward, not a single gaze directed downward. 7 minutes after the salt layer was laid, a handprint emerged from the mud. The fingers were fully spread, the length from the longest finger bone to the wrist about 3 meters, spanning the entire trench bottom. The handprint lingered on the mud surface for about 40 seconds before slowly sinking back. At precisely 2,200 hours, Sentry McQuarrie reported the salt layer cracking. The sound was like ice shattering. The cracks spread from the west end of the trench to the east, the salt blocks lifting on either side of the fissures, the mud below them writhing. We readied our weapons, 8 rifle muzzles trained on the crack in the salt layer. A fissure ran from the western end of the trench to the eastern end, roughly 17 meters in total length. Salt blocks on both sides of the crack jutted upward along the fracture line, their crystalline faces glinting. Directly beneath the crack, mud writhed. It pulsed and contracted in steady rhythms, like immense muscle. Mud erupted from the fissure. The first spurt rose above the trench parapet, slamming into sandbags atop the bunker, denting their surfaces. The ejected matter wasn't slurry. It was a gel-like amalgam of plasma and shattered organ tissue, its viscosity somewhere between blood plasma and lymph. Among the fragmented tissue, identifiable human structures emerged: a finger with an intact nail, a patch of scalp with hair follicles still attached, 3 teeth, one still connected to its periodontal ligament by the root. The mud walls on both sides of the trench peeled away in entire sheets. The surface clay sloughed off in one continuous mass. What lay beneath was a dense network of blood vessels. Veins and arteries were embedded in the earth, ranging from aorta-sized conduits down to capillary-thin webs, branching and interconnecting in tiered patterns. All vessels pulsed simultaneously, their walls engorged with deep red blood, the rhythm synchronized with a heartbeat. Dark red fluid rushed through the translucent walls, with white blood cell-like particles suspended in the flow. The ground gave way beneath their feet. The salt layer had long been hollowed out into a cavity. The combined weight of salt blocks and men collapsed the ceiling. 8 men plunged into a pit filled with mud. The pit was about 2.5 meters deep, spanning the entire width of the communication trench's floor. The mud matched human body temperature, acting heat perceptibly against skin. Hard fragments floated within, shattered bone chips, buttons, the chain of a dog tag. When I hit the bottom, my right hand brushed against a massive structure. Its surface felt like a cross between shark skin and wet clay, rough, textured, warm. A flashlight beam swept across it, revealing scales of calcified shell, each the size of a door. As the light focused, the scales' edges curved with specific radii, their surfaces bearing suture-like serrations. The shape of those bone plates was eerily reminiscent of human pelvises and shoulder blades. Every plate's outer edge showed signs of callus formation, irregular bony outgrowths from fractures that had healed over and over. Something moved beneath the bone plates. The mud parted from the center of the plates to both sides, exposing the core entity. A mountain of flesh rose from the pit's muddy depths. It was roughly the size of a Sherman tank, spindle-shaped, its long axis aligned with the trench. Dozens of human faces were distributed irregularly across its surface, each retaining complete facial features and expression muscles. Between the faces, hundreds of human eyes filled the gaps, their pupil colors ranging from deep brown to gray-blue, iris patterns distinct. All eyes opened simultaneously, pupils adjusting focus in unison, each locking onto one of 8 different directions within the pit. Every face began to speak. Joseph Hawkins's face said, "Go down." The skin at the corner of its mouth showed no wrinkles. The timbre matched his living voice with uncanny precision. Private Salazar's face said, "Mama." As it spoke, its irises rolled upward, revealing bloodshot sclera. 3 faces spoke simultaneously with Wilson's vocal cords, their voices overlapping with a minuscule delay, creating a human echo. "We're all here. It's warm. Come down." The entity split into tentacles. Each tentacle's base was about half a meter in diameter, emerging from the seams between bone plates on the flesh mountain's side. As each tentacle extended, it twisted on itself, squeezing out tissue fluid accumulated between the plates. The tentacle's ends split into 4 lobes, each lined with dense human teeth, incisors, canines, premolars, molars, arranged in the same pattern as a normal human mouth but at 3 times the density. When the 4-lobed mouth opened, the oral cavity was lined with barb-like bone spurs, all angled toward the throat. The first tentacle wrapped around Patrick's waist. The 4-lobed mouth closed over his left shoulder, teeth piercing through his combat uniform, skin, trapezius muscle, the tips grinding against his scapula. Patrick's right hand still moved. He pulled a page covered in Latin prayers from his chest pocket, and facing the paper, recited the counterspell he had deduced, 4 syllables, stress on the second. He spoke the inverse. The tentacle tightened instantly. The force wasn't from muscle contraction. There was a skeletal lever mechanism inside the tentacle, snapping shut like a trap. Patrick's thoracic vertebrae 12 through lumbar 4 were crushed. His spine twisted into 3 segments within his torso. His body was dragged into the largest face atop the flesh mountain. That face's jaw dislocated open, reaching down to its chest, its cheekbones and maxilla flaring outward. Patrick's head vanished into its throat first, followed by his shoulders, torso, and legs. The face's lips sealed tight around the shape of his body as it closed. My medical kit scattered when I fell into the pit. 2 sealed alcohol bottles and 20 packets of medical salt dropped into the sludge. The paper wrappers dissolved on contact with water, and the instant the sodium chloride crystals hit the mud, half a meter radius of sludge flash-boiled. Every suspended tentacle convulsed in unison, and black organic fluid seeped from the gaps between the bone plates on the mountain of flesh. Tentacles charred and snapped off a meter in front of me. The severed ends fell into the mud, floating on the surface as they continued to burn. "Salt," I said. Anything with salt in it. Crawford, Henderson, McGuire, Sanchez, and Gray simultaneously tore open the salt tablets from their individual ration packs. The tablets scattered into the mud, triggering a chain reaction at every point of contact. The sludge's surface layer dehydrated and cracked, forming fissures like parched earth. The mountain of flesh was embedded with salt crystal shards. The bone plates at the contact points turned white and brittle, and the carbonized layer spread deeper. The entity convulsed violently. A dozen vertical fissures split open across the surface of the flesh mountain simultaneously, and from each fissure poured semi-liquid corpses. The digested bodies varied in preservation. The first was nothing but bones with clinging muscle fibers. The second had intact skin, a bloated abdomen, and a twisted face. The third was ejected from the fissure by a clear, stomach acid-like fluid, splitting the dare into head, torso, and limbs, 3 pieces scattering into the mud. Using the gap in the entity's convulsions, I grabbed a surviving ammunition crate board on the pit wall, pulled myself up, and vaulted out of the hole. Crawford hauled McGuire by his rear belt and escaped at the same time. Henderson climbed out from the side. Sanchez and Gray, the wounded, didn't make it. 2 tentacles regenerated from the mud at the pit bottom, coiled around their ankles, and dragged them into the depths. I reached out, but only grabbed one of Gray's dog tags left on the ammunition crate. The pit's edges collapsed further. The 4 of us retreated from the subsidence zone, withdrawing toward the main position's communication trench. 8 men, only 4 left. We pulled back into the communication trench, covered head to toe in mud and blood. The mud had caked onto our combat uniforms. The blood came from Patrick's arterial spray when he was twisted into 3 pieces, forming dark red clumps on my left shoulder and the left side of my helmet. Henderson set down his submachine gun and drew his bayonet. He scraped the mud clinging to his left forearm with the blade. The knife edge was at a 45-degree angle to his skin, scraping repeatedly from wrist to elbow. He cut through the epidermis and kept going into the dermis. The skin curled back, exposing subcutaneous fat. When he reached the fascia, he said one thing. "It's moving under my skin." I unloaded my medical kit. 4 morphine syringes left. I grabbed Henderson's right wrist holding the knife, twisted his fingers open to take the bayonet, and injected a morphine dose into his outer thigh. About 40 seconds after the injection, his eyelids drooped, and his body slumped against the trench wall. I checked the remaining 3 men's skin. On Crawford, McGuire, and myself, arms, necks, ankles, every area soaked in mud had tiny tendrils trying to burrow into the pores. The tendrils were less than half a millimeter long, about the thickness of a hair, with one end already embedded in a hair follicle opening and the other still writhing in the residual mud. I tore open the last packet of medical salt from my kit and dissolved it in drinking water. I rinsed the exposed skin of all 4 of us with the saline. The tendrils dehydrated instantly on contact with the salt water, their tubes blackening and curling, detaching from the follicles, falling to the ground motionless. McGuire's breathing rate dropped from about 30 breaths per minute to 18. He picked up a flashlight, aimed the beam at me, pressed the flashlight's base against his own shoulder socket, and shoved its front end into my chest. With his right hand, he drew his pistol, pressing the muzzle against the flashlight's side, level with my head. "You're the first one to make contact with the anomaly," McGuire said. "Muzzle down." Crawford stepped in from the side in one stride, driving his fist into McGuire's left lower jaw. McGuire's pistol and flashlight flew out of his hands simultaneously. The blow knocked him off balance instantly. He dropped to his knees beside the mud, retching continuously. Crawford unloaded the pistol's magazine, popped out the rounds one by one, and pocketed them. He started counting the remaining ammunition, M1 rifle rounds, grenades, flares. He lined up the 4 Mk2 fragmentation grenades on his own vest, pulled the pin from one, held the fuse lever down with his finger, then reinserted the pin. He shoved those 4 grenades into the outermost pocket of his tactical vest. From the inner compartment of my medical kit, I took out 2 sealed alcohol bottles. The transparent membranes inside had been growing autonomously in the sealed environment. Beneath the alcohol surface, each membrane extended filamentous tendrils. The tendrils from both membranes reached toward each other, touched in the center of the alcohol, fused, and merged into a larger neural network structure. I shone the flashlight beam through the bottle wall onto the trench wall. That transparent membrane was branching and growing like blood vessels, and every few seconds, a faint white flash flickered at the intersection points. "The entity spreads through mud," I said. "Skin contact over 3 seconds, and the invasion begins. Don't sink into the mud, and we can fight." The radio crackled to life again. The battalion channel opened, and a voice claimed the engineer platoon had been wiped out by a mudslide. All hands lost. No reinforcements could reach us. Just before the transmission ended, the company commander's voice cut through. The background carried a layered chorus of human voices, their vocal signatures matching every missing soldier. The monster's voice was identical to the commander's, even the pause in his breath when he spoke, the distinctive nasal twang, down to the last detail. The radio went dead. The commander wasn't in the battalion bunker. Whatever was on the other end of that radio was the entity itself, using his voiceprint to confirm our coordinates. McGuire stood up. He retrieved his pistol magazine from Crawford's pocket, pressing each round back in with deliberate clicks. He didn't look at anyone. He drew his combat knife, walked to the pile of gear left by the fallen soldiers, and stripped 5 uniforms from the corpses. He unfolded each one, soaking them in the saltwater bucket abandoned in the corner by the mess crew. The uniforms absorbed sodium chloride crystals from the brine, then he pulled them out. Water began to evaporate in the air, white salt frost forming on the fabric's surface. He wrapped the salt-soaked uniforms around himself, torso, legs, neck, head, leaving only his eyes exposed. The 4 of us inventoried what remained, a crate of M2 flamethrower fuel canisters, packed with a mix of napalm and rubber-based fuel, the tanks intact, 4 Mk2 fragmentation grenades, about 20 kilograms of salt, stored in ammunition boxes, 20 small packets of medical salt, 300 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition left for the Thompson submachine gun. No flamethrower. The fuel canisters alone weren't weapons. I pried open a canister, checking the nozzle and pressure valve. I converted it into an incendiary explosive device, salt blocks stuffed into the opening, secured with tape and bandages. 2 grenades strapped to the outside, their pins linked by a detonator cord, the cord's end running to a concealed firing position. I sketched the design in my combat log. We needed bait, something to lure the entity into a narrow drainage ditch section of the trench. The ditch lay at the western edge of the main position, where the mud was deepest. Once the entity fully extended, its flanking tentacles would be constrained by the ditch walls, maximizing the exposed core area. Henderson came back from the morphine's haze. He sat up on the ammunition crate, rolling up his left pant leg. Beneath the skin of his calf, the path of the great saphenous vein had turned black. The black vessels writhed under the skin, pulsing in the opposite direction of normal venous return, blood flowing backward. He pulled off his combat boot, the same black lines traced across the skin of his foot. The infection had passed his knee. I marked an observation line. The skin 3 centimeters above the knee looked normal. Below the knee, skin temperature dropped. When I touched it, Henderson confirmed he could still feel it. "At least let this body do something useful before it's done," he said. The 4 of us set up positions along the ditch's edge. I lashed 2 entrenching tool handles across the ditch's mouth, suspending the modified fuel canisters dead center, about 1.5 meters above the mudline. 2 canisters stacked vertically, linked by bandages. The top one had 1 grenade strapped to it. The bottom one had 2. Detonator cords ran in 4 directions, each to a different concealed firing position. Salt blocks lined the ditch's rim, ready to be thrown. Henderson stripped off his salt-soaked protective layer, folding it and placing it beside the ammo crate. He wore only his standard combat fatigues as he walked into the center of the ditch. He used my scalpel to cut open his left forearm. The incision ran longitudinally over the radial artery, 2 centimeters deep. Arterial blood sprayed out, splattering across the mud's surface. Within 30 seconds, the mud began to pulse. The pulse traveled from the far end of the ditch toward where Henderson stood, a moving bulge rising along the mud's surface. The scent of blood spread through the moisture in the mud, activating the tentacle network. McGuire crawled into his hide position, tightening the salt-soaked uniforms around himself. Crawford lay prone 5 meters to the right of the ditch's edge, 4 grenades within arm's reach. I crouched in my concealed firing point, the Thompson stock pressed to my shoulder, the front sight trained on the detonator cord junction of the fuel canisters. In the lower right corner of my scope's field of view, Henderson stood in the center of the mire. He didn't look back. His right hand hung at his side, still gripping the bayonet I'd taken from him earlier. The blood on the blade had dried. The mud in the ditch rose as a single mass from the bottom. The entire mud surface lifted as a complete membrane, instantly pushed upward by something massive beneath. Mud spilled over both edges of the ditch, viscous black fluid washing over the tops of my combat boots. The concentration of rust and iron in the air spiked. The oxygen level seemed to plummet. The core mass of flesh was fully exposed. Its volume far exceeded the visual estimates made from the pit's edge. The drainage ditch stretched 12 meters in length, and the mountain of flesh filled 9 of them. It was spindle-shaped overall, with a maximum diameter of about 4.5 meters. Embedded in its surface were at least 50 recognizable human faces, each retaining complete skin texture, eyebrow contours, and lip outlines. Between the faces were packed hundreds of human eyeballs, their pupils ranging from deep brown to grayish blue, with varied iris patterns, the corneas reflecting the beam of the flashlight. All the faces opened their mouths in unison. All the eyeballs turned simultaneously toward Henderson. The bony plates on the flesh mound's surface rearranged themselves. Hundreds of fused pelvic and scapular bones formed a scale-like calcified shell that began to slide, with tissue fluid oozing from the gaps between the plates. The plates realigned along the direction of muscle bundles, revealing the bases of 12 tentacles. Each tentacle base was embedded about half a meter into the main body, wrapped in ring-shaped sphincter muscles. The sphincters relaxed simultaneously, and the tentacles extended. The 12 main tentacles stretched to full length. Each was as thick as a human waist, ranging from 3 to 6 meters long. Their epidermis had the sheen of soaked human skin, with longitudinal muscle bundles and pulsating vascular networks visible beneath the surface. The tip of each tentacle split open into a four-lobed mouth structure, 4 flaps of flesh rolled outward, lined with densely packed human teeth. The upper palate featured central incisors, lateral incisors, and canines. The lower palate had premolars and molars, arranged in a pattern matching the human dental arch, but at 3 times the normal tooth density. When the four-lobed mouths opened, the oral cavities revealed barb-like bone spurs, all oriented in the same direction, slanting toward the depths of the digestive tract. The peristaltic rhythm of the digestive cavity matched the swallowing reflex of a human esophagus. Henderson stood in the center of the mire. His right hand, hanging at his side, released its grip, and the bayonet fell into the mud. He took a step forward. The first tentacle coiled around his waist. It wrapped twice around his torso, and as it tightened, the buttons of his combat uniform popped off one by one. The second tentacle wound around his legs, from his ankles up to his knees. The third came from behind, snaking around his left shoulder and upper arm. Henderson's right hand broke free from the coils. He raised his thumb toward me. The knuckles were swollen from contusions, and dried blood and mud were wedged under his nails. The entity lifted him into the air. The tentacles coordinated their movements, flipping Henderson's body horizontally, head downward and legs upward. They transported him toward the summit of the flesh mound. At the apex was the largest face, an adult male, estimated to be between 40 and 45 years old, with prominent cheekbones, robust brow ridges, and a mandible dislocated and gaping open down to the chest. Inside the mouth was a cavity, where the esophagus and trachea merged into a single passage, its walls lined with cilia-like structures beating in a steady rhythm. I pulled the trigger. The Thompson submachine gun fired in semi-automatic mode. The first round struck the fuse wire junction of the upper fuel canister. The fuse ignited, and the flame line traveled along the bandage into the canister. The second shot hit the lower canister, the bullet piercing its body, and napalm began to seep from the hole. The upper canister exploded. Fragments of salt blocks sprayed outward in a fan shape from the blast point, embedding themselves into the flesh mound's surface. The bone plates at the impact sites instantly turned white, with carbonization cracks spreading along the bone seams, their area proportional to the mass of the embedded salt. The first wave of convulsions rippled across the mound. All the tentacles contracted at once, and Henderson's body was flung free. The carbonization process advanced from the surface inward. The calcium in the bone plates reacted osmotically with the sodium chloride, cell walls ruptured, and intracellular fluid leaked out. The entity expelled a massive amount of tissue fluid, black blood streaming down along the gaps between the bone plates. In agony, the flesh mound leaped up from the mud. The entire mass rose at least 1.2 meters above the mire. Its exposed underside was a dense carpet of suckers. Hundreds of ring-shaped suckers, each ranging from 10 to 30 centimeters in diameter, were arranged in concentric circles. At the center of each sucker was a small mouth, identical in structure to the tentacles' four-lobed mouths but reduced to 2 to 5 centimeters in diameter. The small mouths opened simultaneously, their tiny teeth clicking together, while the ring-shaped muscles at the sucker's edge contracted rhythmically to filter organic nutrients from the mud. As the suckers pulled free from the mire, a dense tearing sound filled the air, with clinging mud drawn into countless thread-like columns of slime that snapped back in midair. Crawford had already moved to the right edge of the ditch. 4 grenades were clutched in his hands, their safety pins pulled one after another. His throwing motion came in 2 sets, the first 2 aimed at the center of the entity's underside, the next 2 tossed into the flesh mound's interior through a crack in its side. The interval between each grenade leaving his hand was no more than 1.5 seconds. 2 grenades detonated in the suction cup region on the creature's underside. All suction cups within the effective blast radius were shattered, their small mouths torn loose, spewing a black tissue slurry from the ruptured ends. 2 more grenades exploded inside the flesh mountain. Pre-existing cracks on its flank were violently expanded by the blasts, one fissure lengthening from its original meter to over 3 meters. 1/3 of its mass was torn away from the main body. A rain of black blood, tissue chunks, and half-digested corpse fragments fell. A complete human forearm with hand intact broke free, landing on the trench parapet, its fingers still curling. A head still attached to its cervical spine was ejected from the fissure, rolling to a stop by my feet, face up. It was Sanchez. His eyeballs were still rotating. His lips parted once, soundlessly, then stilled. The entity made a sound. Hundreds of vocal cords vibrated simultaneously, erupting into an inhuman shriek. The sound sources were distributed within the mouths of every human face on the flesh mountain's surface. Each mouth was vocalizing, with different frequencies and pitches, layering into a broadband scream spanning beyond human auditory range. It was a high-frequency shriek that felt like it could pierce the brain. Many of the sounds exceeded the limits of human hearing, leaving only pure agony that made the ear canals bleed. The sound pressure waves shattered the pain threshold of eardrums. A stinging pain flared in my ear canals. Blood from ruptured capillaries began to flow from both ears simultaneously. The shriek's vibrations caused the trench walls to collapse. The entire western wall of the communication trench gave way, burying some of Crawford's firing positions. My left shoulder and back were struck by falling clods of earth. Dirt hammered against my helmet, the impacts mixing with the echoes of the entity's scream. Wounded, the flesh mountain attempted to retreat into the mud. Its tentacles retracted, slapping the mud's surface for leverage. Its bony plates realigned as it prepared to submerge. Having left the mud, the tissue on its surface began to desiccate and crack within 3 seconds. It was frantically desperate to burrow back into the mire. If it sank back, the mud would once again act as armor. McCready rose from his cover. He was draped in his uniform, saturated with brine, its surface crystallized, reflecting a frosty white light under the flashlight beam. He gathered the remaining salt blocks from the ammo crate, all of them, about 15 kilograms, cradling them against his chest, secured by his arms. He crossed the trench parapet and leapt directly from the edge toward the flesh mountain. His boots landed on 2 human faces on the creature's surface, their features deforming under his soles. He climbed along the flank toward the fissure, his left hand gripping the edge of a bony plate, his right hand stuffing salt block after salt block into the gaping wound. Salt contacted the entity's internal fluids. As the blocks plunged into the fissure, the monster's inner tissue instantly blanched, shriveled, and burst apart. The edges of the fissure visibly changed from dark red to ashen gray, then to a black, carbonized crust. The carbonization advanced deeper into the tissue. A crackling sound, like dry wood meeting fire, emanated from within. The flesh mountain desiccated and cracked from the inside out. Several tentacles lost hydraulic support, going limp, their joint movements uncoordinated. But one tentacle, roughly 40 centimeters in diameter, retained mobility. It whipped from the creature's back toward McCready's position. The 4-lobed mouth at its tip opened mid-motion, its bite aimed at McCready's neck and upper chest. The 4-lobed mouth clamped diagonally downward across McCready's left shoulder. The lower jaw's teeth pierced through the clavicle, the upper jaws through the 3rd and 4th ribs. The closing force wrenched the spine. McCrady's spine fractured cleanly transverse at the third thoracic vertebra. His corpse was flung away, slammed against the trench wall, then slid down into the mud. "Wilson," McCrady's final words before impact. "I got the son of a bitch for you." The entity's tentacles bite reflex continued, but the internal dehydration triggered by the salt was irreversible. The flesh mountain's volume visibly shrank at an observable rate, its spindle structure collapsing inward. Bony plates fell away in sheets, revealing the inner layer of necrotic, liquefying human tissue. The turgor in hundreds of eyes simultaneously diminished, corneas lost their luster, pupils dilated and fixed. A final vertical split occurred at the core. The fissure extended downward from the palate of the largest human face at the summit, through the pharynx, the esophageal cavity, all the way to the entity's center. Within the crack, a semi-formed humanoid structure was exposed. Head, torso, limbs outlined, skin incompletely covering it, spine exposed to the outside. Its surface was studded with poorly fused human parts. Another face lacking a lower jaw embedded in the shoulder, 3 extra hearts beating within the inner knee of the left leg, each pulsing at its own independent rhythm. Deep within the fissure, the semi-formed remnant was trying to extricate itself from the core. It was assembling itself from the leftover limbs of comrades. In the torso of the half-formed body, ribs splayed outward from the center, sternum absent. A heart 5 times normal size pumped within the chest cavity. Multiple sinoatrial nodes dotted its surface, each independently releasing electrical impulses, creating overlapping heart rhythms. It was initiating its own circulatory system. I hoisted the final canister of M2 flamethrower fuel. The canister weighed about 20 kilograms. I slung it over my right shoulder and advanced along the trench edge toward the fissure in the flesh mountain. Distance, roughly 12 meters. Mud clung to my boots, each step tearing free with a wet, peeling sound. The flesh mountain's tentacles lashed out in one last, aimless frenzy, shattering an empty ammunition crate, striking the trench wall, pounding into the mud. I reached the front of the fissure, lowered the canister from my shoulder, gripped it by the handles, and aimed the nozzle into the gap. I shoved the canister deep into the opening. It lodged between the half-formed torso and the pulsing heart, jammed in place by broken ribs and the beating organ. I released my grip and pulled back. The heart's rhythm set the canister shuddering inside the cavity. Viscous gasoline gel mixed with residual bodily fluids on the canister's surface. I retreated behind cover and raised my rifle. A single shot. The round pierced the fissure and struck the canister. The rupture triggered the first eruption. Napalm splattered, coating the entire surface of the half-formed body. A second explosion followed, fueled by built-up pressure inside the tank, spraying fuel deeper into the flesh mountain's internal structures. Fire spread through the entity. Combustion temperature exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Lord's remains remained upright for about 4 seconds as hair, skin, and subcutaneous fat melted away. Facial features twisted and collapsed in the heat. He opened his mouth and shouted a stream of syllables in ancient Frankish. By the time the sound emerged, flames had already burned through his trachea. The words were forced out through the gap around the fuel canister in his chest, distorted by the crackle of burning gas. The ancient cry lasted 6 seconds. Then his vocal cords charred and snapped. The entire flesh mountain collapsed into carbonized powder. Bone plates flaked off, crumbling midair. Tentacles severed their own neural connections, breaking free from the base and falling into the mud, where they continued to burn. Hundreds of human faces, one after another, closed their lips, shut their eyes, their skin charring before vanishing. All tentacles went limp, twitching erratically across the mud's surface before stiffening. Teeth from the 4-petaled mouths at their tips fell out one by one, hailing down onto the mud. The vascular network in the mud necrotized. Dark red fluid ceased flowing, fading from red to brown to black. Vessel walls dissolved, blending with the muck. The trench walls returned to ordinary wet soil, mixed with shrapnel, bone fragments, and charred wood splinters. The air remained searing hot. Within the drainage ditch, a layer of tissue ash about 2 centimeters thick coated the mud's surface. It floated atop the sludge, parked by the impact of residual raindrops into dense, ring patterns. Silence fell. After the entity's shrieking ceased, The remaining echoes reverberated through the communication trench for about 4 seconds before finally fading. My magazine was empty. Above the Thompson submachine gun's barrel shroud, heat haze still shimmered. Smoke curled from the muzzle. Damage to my eardrums caused persistent mid to low frequency hearing loss. All outside sounds felt muffled, as if through thick cloth. I raised my left hand to my ear. My fingertips brushed the entrance of the ear canal, crusted with half-dried blood. Crawford emerged from cover. A wound on his forehead, from collapsing debris, was caked with mud and blood. He retrieved an M1 rifle from beside the barricade. In the drainage ditch, Henderson's fallen body was recovered. He had been flung by a tentacle into the mud on the trench's western side. Face down, the back of his head visible, his hair dusted with a layer of the entity's tissue ash. He did not move. McGuire's body lay at the base of the trench wall. A broken spine had twisted his posture, bending his torso and legs at an unnatural, non-anatomical angle. The saline-soaked uniform he wore still held him in a half-crouch against the wall. Where the flesh mountain had stood, only a blackened, carbonized crater remained. At its bottom pooled a semi-liquid residue of tissue fluid, blood, and mud. I took the combat log from its waterproof pouch, scraped the crusted mud off the cover with my fingernail, and opened it. On the record page, Patrick's line of inverted Latin still remained. The handwriting was intact. The paper was damp with sweat and moisture but unbroken. I copied the remaining 4 Latin syllables into the blank margin on the right side of the log, noting, * result of inverted recitation. Do not recite inverted. * Crawford approached, leaning on his M1 rifle reversed against the ground. His lips moved. My intermittent deafness let me catch only one word, * ammo star. I took stock. Remaining supplies. 2 Thompson submachine gun magazines, 40 rounds of .45 caliber total, 30 rounds of M1 rifle ammunition, 0 grenades, 3 kilograms of salt, 4 small packets of medical salt. Remaining personnel 2. Dawn. The rain had stopped. Crawford and I sat slumped back to back in the trench mud. Around us lay carbonized entity fragments, shattered bone plates, and the mangled remains of our comrades. The mud's surface floated with a layer of pale gray tissue ash, pushed by the morning breeze into slender lines along the trench edge. The radio crackled again. The voice from battalion communications was crisp, no background static, no chorus of voices. The engineer platoon had departed 2 hours ago, estimated arrival in 40 minutes. Crawford wiped the clotted blood from his forehead with his sleeve. 12 men, he said. 2 left. They won't believe it. I retrieved the combat log and 3 sealed sample vials from the waterproof pouch. The first vial held a transparent membrane sample from Gray's wound, the film fully expanded in alcohol into a neural network pattern. The second vial contained carbonized residue from solid bone plate fragments. The third vial was empty. I folded Patrick's original Latin notes and stuffed them inside, screwing the cap tight. The vascular web patterns on the trench wall had been covered by fresh mud. I scraped away the surface crust with my bayonet and snapped photos. The lens focused on a 2 by 1.5 meter section of the wall. The blood vessel network in the photos was starkly visible, as intricate as the veins exposed when peeling back human skin. 40 minutes later, the engineer platoon arrived. 2 stretcher bearers hauled Crawford and me out of the trench. I glanced back toward the drainage ditch. Henderson and McQueen's bodies were already sealed in body bags, names and service numbers scrawled on the fabric with marker pens. Field Hospital. An intelligence officer sat before my bed, my combat log and sample vials on the table. He labeled the incident as German biological weapons experimentation, classifying all records. He handed me a non-disclosure agreement and a transfer order, returned to the United States, assigned to Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Before signing, I used surgical forceps to pluck a scab from the edge of a wound on my arm for a final self-check. Left forearm, near the wrist joint, a scab roughly 0.2 centimeters in diameter. The forceps gripped the scab's edge and lifted. Beneath the scab was a pinpoint-sized eyeball. The iris was dark brown, the pupil constricted, aimed at my face. I sliced into the subcutaneous tissue with a scalpel around the eyeball's rim, excising a half-centimeter radius of skin hole. The pupil remained contracted throughout the removal. The tissue chunk dropped into an alcohol vial. The eyeball shriveled into a gray grain in the alcohol, dissolving completely after 15 seconds. I signed the non-disclosure agreement. The intelligence officer collected the documents and left the ward, boarding the transport ship for home. Standing on the deck, France's coastline shrank to a gray line off the starboard side. I retrieved the combat log and the alcohol vial from the waterproof pouch's inner pocket. The liquid had cleared, with a layer of gray sediment at the bottom. I marked the date and collection site on the vial with a military marker, inner wrist joint. Flipping to the last page of the log, I penciled a final line over the paper's water stains. It said, "It's warm down there. There's more below. They're waiting in the mud." Closing the log, I looked up at the coastline. The ship's propeller churned a gray-white wake. Nothing unusual on the water's surface. The aerial shot pulls back from the transport ship's deck, sweeping over northern France's coastline, over the tidal flats, over bombed-out farmland and hedgerows, over the crisscrossing trench networks. The lens drives toward the ground, piercing the muddy trench surface, piercing the water table, piercing the continuous sedimentary rock layers. Hundreds of meters underground. A vast natural cavity. Stalactite-like structures hang from the cave ceiling. Below lies an underground lake. The liquid is a mix of mud and blood, its surface still, without ripples. Dozens of flesh mounds soak along the lake's edge. Identical in structure to the entity just destroyed, spindle-shaped bodies, bone-plate shells, surfaces dense with faces and eyeballs. Each mound pulses independently, their rhythms staggered, creating an unending composite heartbeat. At the top of one mound, bone plates part, an eye socket opens an eye. The pupil contracts, looking upward. Its gaze pierces hundreds of meters of rock, the water table, the muddy trenches, the atmosphere. Staring straight out of the screen. Screen goes black. The sound of mud bubbling. A faint heartbeat. Both overlapping. Sustained.